Hey, hey, hey! We are ready to define our first calculation. So here we are in our sales table, and we have our sales amount and tax amount. And the first calculation we'll try to define is a total sales amount, which is a sum of both of these. Now, if you notice up at the ribbon over here, in the modeling tab, you have this calculation pane, and ignore this new table for now, but really the key ones are either you can define a new measure or a new column. All right. So first of all, let's save this file, and we're going to go take a peek at the file itself. So this is 3761 kilobytes, and I'm going to write that down. Where's my notepad? There we go. 3761 KB. Perfect. All right, so I have that, and I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to define a new column. All right, this is just one of the available calculation types. So I'm going to say new column, and great, I see this new column added here, but really the key is the formula bar here. So I have column, and I can change that name, and I'll say total sales amount. All right, total sales amount equals, and I'm going to use the column name sales amount. Perfect. All right, so you notice that it auto completes. Let's look that closer up. So I'm here in my formula bar, and let's see that again. So if I were to type in sales amount, it just narrows it down, and then I can hit the tab key on my keyboard to complete it. And plus the other one is tax amount, and there we go, and I can just hit enter, and my column has been added. Right, it's just summing these two up. I can change the formatting if I wanted to. Let's change that to 0 decimal places, make it look a little cleaner. And if you notice here that it has a slightly different icon to indicate that it is a calculated column. So total sales amount. But what I really wanted to show you was that I'm going to save this file again. And if I go back, notice the size here is 3789. Right, so that's key, that after I added a calculated column, the size grew. Oh boy, you can't see that. There you go. Right? It went from 3761 to 3789. Now this is a very, very small data set. Any real production data set is going to be far larger than this, and I'm going to come back and talk about the impact of this. Now, by the way, so between these two, new measures and new column, I see Excel users inevitably gravitate towards new column, and they keep creating these columns and additional columns, and right, and they keep going, keep creating these here, which may feel natural for Excel user, but it's not really the way you want to go with Power BI desktop. Any math you want to perform, typically you would want to create a measure. Now there are going to be scenarios where you want to create a calculated column. We'll cover those later, but I would say your default should be that if there's a calculation, it should be a measure. So great, so how do we define a measure to calculate this? So in here, our total sales amount was just sales amount plus sales tax amount. Well, great, I can define a measure which did that, can't I? Well, let's first of all, let's try a new measure this time. And we're going to say, oh, this is my total sales. Oops, if I can type that right. Total sales equals, and you know what, I'm just going to be lazy and I'm going to copy that formula. So I'm going to go here, sales amount plus sales tax amount, click new measure again, and I'll say total sales equals that, right? That's it. Or is it? Well, not really. So if I hit enter, it gives me an error. What happened here? Well, the same formula worked for my column, but not for my measure. And gosh, this is one of the key principles here, which is called row context. Now, row context sounds kind of crazy, and later you will hear another term, filter context, and that, frankly, row context and filter context, these four words scared the shit out of me for a long time, till I realized that they're not really that complicated. So what a row context is the knowledge of a current row, that you have a current row. So in here, when I'm defining a column and the formula is total sales amount equal to, let's go down where it's slightly variable. There you go. So now you see it. So total sales amount, when I define it as is sales amount plus the sales tax amount, right? And let's say if I'm trying to calculate this cell, let's try that again. I'm trying to calculate this cell. So when it's trying to calculate this cell and it goes to this formula, the row is implied. It does know which row it is on. I'm like, yeah, I know I'm on this row. So when you say sales amount, I know exactly which one to grab, this guy. And when you say tax amount, I know exactly which one to grab, this guy. So there's no ambiguity, right? So in a calculated column, the row context, which is simply the knowledge of the current row, is implied. When it's trying to calculate a specific value in that column, it says, yep, I know which row I'm on. I'm on this row. And of course, the whole thing repeats for each one of these cells. So that's it. That's what row context is. Believe me, we'll talk a whole lot more about this. But for now, it's really easy. Let's not complicate things more than we need to, shall we? Right? So row context is simply a knowledge of the current row. And when you're doing a calculated column, it's going, step by step, row by row, calculating each of these numbers. It obviously knows which row it's on. However, when you define a measure, measures are not tied to a column. Measures are overall. So if in a measure you say, go to sales amount and go to tax amount, it's asking you which one. Which one, Avi? I don't know. Which one are you talking about? I got so many. I don't know how to choose. And this is what we call a naked reference, right? So a naked column reference where it doesn't have, any clothes on, or in other words, it doesn't have any wrappers around it. What wrappers am I talking about? I'm talking about something that aggregates things, aggregation functions. Typically sum, that's the simplest one, right? So you can't refer to columns directly because there's no row context in measures implicitly, right? By default, there's no row. So if you refer to a column directly, it's saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know which one. Which sales amount should I grab? Help me out. So it's not going to work that way. So we have to define this measure slightly differently. We're just going to have to put some clothes on it, and we're going to wrap it in a sum. And now it's not a naked column reference. Now it's saying, okay, great. I'm just going to sum everything up. Doesn't matter which row, what row. It's just going to be a sum of everything. All right, hit enter, and it's there. Now, you don't see it in the table. But that's the whole idea, that it's not manifested in the table. So, right, so we defined a column. Now we define a measure, the same thing. And I'm going to hit save again. Go back to our file and our size, and notice the size. I'm going to hit refresh, and no, nothing's happening. It's still 3789 kilobytes with a new measure. And that, my friends, is one of the biggest differences between a calculated column and a measure. Calculated column is actually physically manifested in the table and saved back to the file. It's almost as if you had pulled that column from your source data. So when you keep defining calculated columns one after the other, keep building your calculations that way, guess what? Your file size is going to keep growing bigger and bigger. And this is, again, a very small sample data set. Once you're working with realistic data, that can be a real problem. Why? Why, Avi? I don't care. It can be a 50 gigabyte file. Who cares? Really? Well, uh, yeah, I mean, you should care because it's not really about file size, right? So disk space is plenty. Even a very basic laptop you're going to pick up out of Costco is probably going to have a terabyte of disk space. But these models don't quite work this way. So this is based on tabular technology, and one of the key features of tabular technology is that it's in memory. Yes, it's in memory. What it does is that whole model is first of all, it's compressed to a crazy degree. We've seen that already, right? It started off at 20 megs and compressed to a really small size. So it's compressed by a great amount, but then it loads the whole thing in memory, and that's what makes it so blazingly fast, which is awesome. But guess what? Your memory, you probably don't have a terabyte of memory on your laptop, right? So memory is more limited than disk space. So we want to be careful about our file size because that's also an indicator of our memory footprint. All right, gosh. So, hey, I feel very passionately about it and I can go on, but I hope you get a clue. The message I'm trying to tell you is that calculated column and measures are very different, and really, measures is the way to go. Any numeric calculation, you should not be doing using calculated columns. You should be defining measures. All right. Even though the end result, they look the same, they look, feel the same. Now that I have defined, so let's get rid of this guy, and if we bring in, let's keep it simple by product key. Well, let's do product category subcategory. Perfect. Oh, I could have just used this table. Now, if I bring in my calculated column, total sales amount, and my measure, total sales, let's fix the formatting of this guy. Perfect. Notice that they show the exact same result. But don't let that fool you, because I have shown you exactly what's happening under the covers. Where did my notepad go? Here, right? So calculated column saved back to the file, measure not saved to the file. That's one difference. There are other differences between calculated columns and measures. One of that is measure, since it's never stored in the file, it's always calculated on the fly. It's dynamic. That means it can reflect a lot of changes that go in the report and the model, versus a calculated column which cannot. Actually, that's a deeper point, so I'm going to come back to that later. But for now, I hope it's clear to you that measures is the way to go almost always. We'll talk about exceptions, but for now, I want you to make that your habit. You know, people are like left-handed or right-handed, and if you're in a shootout, in a duel, you're going to just, reach with your dominant hand. I want measures to become your dominant hand. All right, I rest my case.